Hi everyone, thanks for trusting and coming to this trust workshop. My name is Kristiina Hiukka. You can trust, it's a Finnish name. That's where my accent is from, so when you're wondering what is she actually saying, that's why I speak how I speak. I actually have a long career in leadership, training, consulting and coaching, and I now live in Seattle. And as a Seattleite, a few years ago, I started to ask around people about women who they knew who are innovative, who are innovators, but female. And surprisingly to me, I got just blank looks. What do you mean? And they thought about it for a while, and then they said, oh, Madame Curie. I said, great. She died 1936. So that's how I created Women in Innovation, which was a summit in 2012 in Seattle. We had about 250 attendees. Some of them came from afar. And that's how I got involved with Melinda, who invited me here today to talk about trust. Because if you think about it, trust is kind of like the basis of everything that's valuable, everything that's important in our lives. Don't you agree? How many of you work in teams? Good. How many of you are team leaders yourselves? Great. So if there wasn't trust on your team, it would probably be pretty hard to get things done. I see it as an oil, as an accelerator, as a facilitator of whether it's in personal relationships or a foundation for something we want to build and create. Okay, so oops, here we go. So to get started, I will first give you a little bit of a sort of a introduction to or a definition of trust, and then we'll talk about a model that I have come up with over the years of working with so many leaders, both men and women. And I want you to test it out. We could talk about trust from so many different aspects, especially, you know, at this conference, we could have a week-long conversation about trust and how it's formed and how it's created, and how do we keep building it so that the world's a better place for it. However, I will give you just a very particular perspective to trust at this workshop. So bear with me here. So here is an approach to trust that I think kind of puts it all together in a nice way. It's about my assessment of your reliability. Do you do what you say you do? How much can I trust your word? How honest are you? What about your competence? Are you competent or strong enough to do and carry out what you say you do? And in a way, trust is about belief. It's a leap of faith when we say we trust someone. So in order for me to trust you, I regard you trustworthy. So that's where we go when we look at trust. Is also another approach to think about trust. It could be sort of a mechanism, a vehicle for something. And the way the Harvard professor Amy Cuddy says it, that trust is a conduit through which ideas travel, is very much connected to the area of innovation and how we create new things. So if we have trust, we can create new things, new experiences, new ways of doing things. Now, when when we meet, there's two trait dimensions that come into play immediately, and we judge each other by. I judge you, and you judge me by how warm I might appear. Or the other one is the competence. So the more warm and the more competent I judge you to be, the more I trust you. And this has been seen to work all over the world. So in different cultures, these two dimensions are in works. So all of this leads to us judging somebody else's trustworthiness. So when you think about who you trust, I want you to think about the people that pop up in your head. Are they your family members, or are they from work? And why, possibly, they've gained your trust. I hope your list is a bit longer than this guy's. My trust is exemplified by this one person. Her name is Heidi, and I really hope that you all have a Heidi in your life. Why? Because Heidi turned out to be the most reliable person in my life. And the way our friendship started was that we were co-workers. She was the secretary at an institute where I was hired as a training manager. And she had really high hopes for our relationship and collaboration, ability to work together. Then something happened at work where she felt slighted by me. She was upset. She wrote me a letter where she talked to me about how sad she was and how upset she was. I was totally oblivious to have ever caused any hurt. So we had a very hard heart-to-heart conversation. And that heart-to-heart conversation, where we both were very vulnerable and very real with each other, turned out to be the foundation for our friendship that has lasted about 30 years. Now, what happened in that conversation was something that was nothing of that was taken for granted. We went down to the bare bones of our relationships. How do we want to be with each other? How do we want to be with each other when things get hard? So she is still in my life, and she's now a CEO of a very successful company back in Finland, and is a very, oops, what is going on here? Sorry about that. So on one hand, we have these people who we trust, like my Heidi. But then there are people who we don't necessarily trust or trust anymore, because trust is a dynamic thing. It evolves. We most of the time, every day, daily in our interactions, we are in the process of finding out how our trust is either gained or lost, right? So if you look at trust in a more general way, it's not only people we trust, but it's the brands, it's the products, it's the services, it's the companies. And here's one way of checking how brands and companies are trusted. We're ranking them by their reputation. So from 2014, only 4 companies remained in 2015. So things change. Our perceptions change. There's a company called Edelman Trust Barometer. that assesses trust all over the world in all industry sectors. And they have concluded that trust has hit an unprecedented low this year, and especially in the area of business. So business, trust in business has decreased everywhere, all over the world. 16 out of 27 countries have reported now decreased trust in business. The least trusted areas of industry sectors that are now assessed are banking and financing. However, technology is still the most trusted area. So any of you who here at this conference work at in tech, you're in a good company so far. So for the purposes of this conversation at this conference, I'd like to change the whole question of who do we trust into how do we trust. So what that means is that we need to turn the conversation about the other into ourselves. It is, how do I experience trust? And how do I express it? So So the conversation is about internal process. It's about my own judgment of me. How do I build my trustworthiness? So the question is to go and look in that woman or the man in the mirror. Through my work, I've come to this place of looking at things from a continuum, a feminine and a masculine paradigm in regards to trust. And I wondered, how can I put the words around this experience that I've seen over and over again? So I tried it, put the whole experience onto this continuum, but it had to be a wiggly line because this is not engineering science. This is behavior. So I created a model where it's a yin and yang symbol, and that implies that it's not just good or bad or better or worse or one or the other, but we need both in a very balanced way. So what does it mean if I trust you in a masculine way? Not saying that every man operates this way. There are lots of women who do the same way. But if I come from that place of trusting in a masculine way, it means that I'm approaching you through a paradigm of doing something together. The more we accomplish together, we do a project or an activity, the more we become trusting of each other. Okay, so the doing part of it. So we are the builders of trust. It's an external process where I'm looking for signs for respect for you. The more I can create my judgment about you through different things that you've accomplished, the car you drive, the money you make, the house you live in, the more I can assess your value and that creates the respect for me, the more I can then begin trusting in you. I call this totem polling. And then on the other hand, if I am a person who is who comes from the feminine paradigm and feminine way of trusting, I approach you with more of an internal process, a sensing you, feeling you. And my approach to you starts from me being vulnerable with you. I share stories about maybe something that where I'm failed, where I have made mistakes, or where I'm not so totally sure of myself. I don't want to come across as I'm above you or somehow better than you. I want to come across as somebody who you can relate to, who is a relatable, friendly person who you can be friends with. And therefore, once I do this, I'm creating a space for empathy and sympathy to happen, and therefore we can create trust in that space and be in that trust. Now, that sharing I call friendship making. I think a lot of us women are good at that, and it really works between us when a woman meets another woman in that particular way. But there are underlying expectations that are often not noticed. There's sometimes an unspoken expectation that if I share some of my vulnerabilities, I expect you to share yours. I look for signs of sympathy or empathy in you once you hear my story. I want you not to consider me a threat or somebody above you, but somebody relatable, somebody you can be friends with. These are usually not named. They are underlying the way we approach each other and behave. So that's what I've observed happen over and over again. So there are people and situations where people choose to approach trust making like a totem poler, or they approach it with a mindset for friendship making. Let's be friends first and then develop our trust by sharing our vulnerabilities. So once we have empathy down, then what can happen is that when you often hear this saying that trust needs to be earned over shared experiences over a long period of time. When this happens, I've seen trust happen in an instant. It happens immediately, because once you're in that atmosphere, that circle of empathy, the trust happens right there and then. So here are just two ways of doing trust and being in trust. And I assure you there are a million more, and these are just two perspectives so far. However, I've seen this happen so many times that I've also recognized that there are some dangers in it. And I want you to be aware of those dangers. When you are out there trying to get funding, and somebody, if that investor is coming from a totem poling perspective, looking at you when you are asking for money, it is the external signs of success that they are looking for in order to trust you. If you approach them with sharing your vulnerable stories about who you are and you're not so good and this happened and then this happened because I wasn't that great, you might have a mismatch, and there might happen some hazardous misinterpretation of signals that you put out there. So therefore, I would like to use this workshop for those conversations about what might happen. So let's look at where your scales might end. Whether you find yourself as a friendship maker, revealing your vulnerabilities first to the other, or the totem poler. So I've got 3 questions that I'd like you to talk to with your partners for a while. Do you find yourself going, as a default, more towards the friendship maker aspect or the totem poler? And when would you find yourself there? Where have these particular styles affected the results that you were after? Do you have some experiences where it has affected your relationships or results at work? And then thirdly, what are the potential hazards that can happen when you have these 2 approaches collide? If one expects another way of doing trust, while the other one has a different way of doing trust. So there. How is that? Can I ask you to find a partner who you can talk with? This is a 2-by-2 conversation. And I'll give you about a minute warning after about 5 minutes or so. And then we'll see if there's stories you would be willing to share. Okay? From the buzz in the room, I feel like there was some very interesting conversations that took place. And I'm very, very curious if you were willing to share some of the conversations that happened about the hazards and what really can happen and what have you experienced. Would anybody be willing to share some so that we can have a conversation?
I just share what I shared with Lydia. So I tend to be a totem poler. I definitely feel like trust is something that needs to be earned, and to earn that trust, that means there's a time requirement.
Absolutely.
I can't think of anyone I've ever met where I'm like, wow, I trust this person within like a few minutes. Yeah. So, but once that trust is there, then I become a friendship maker. Then I can I'll do the ugly girl cry and all that stuff. Yeah. So, but yeah, I definitely start off on the totem poler. So,
cool. Thank you. Anybody else have a story to tell?
Hi, I'm Shondell. I just wanted to share like a summary of our experiences, I guess. For myself, which is socially a friendship maker, but at work a totem poler. Talking to Alexandra, she started her career sort of in the reverse, where she was a totem poler, but then felt like she wasn't being genuine to who she truly was outside of work and made adjustments, whereas I decided, okay, maybe I shouldn't be a friend at work and flipped it. So I think we sort of adjust our behavior based on environment and then maybe, again, depending on whatever the situation itself would dictate.
Amen to that. And that's exactly the point here, is that knowing yourself within the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about situational trust, where we've worked with friends that we trust in specific situations, but to achieve something, we don't necessarily trust them to do that. Like, what did we say? We said...
just like we couldn't rely on them. So we felt like if we couldn't rely on them to rise up to our expectations, then we weren't going to ask them to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And so you pointed out that it was definitely situational for you.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay.
Oh, actually.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Monica. I guess I'm going to be a friendship maker with all of you, so please don't burn me. So we talked a little bit about how we're from warm countries, right? So we have a tendency towards being like double kisses and being very friendly and maybe being vulnerable before the person is like ready for that. and then you kind of, and you're like, here's who I am, and then they're like, hi, I gotta go, and then you feel this kind of like you've gone too far, and knowing how to navigate that while being authentic to yourself. Right. And kind of what feels natural, but building those relationships relatively quickly, and then taking the risk. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. I think it's an immigrant thing because you're new to the country. I mean, I've been here 13 years, and I was discussing with Monica, right? So it's just a different style, and maybe because you're so eager to make friends, you tend to share a lot. And again, I don't want to sound prejudiced, but sometimes I feel maybe I'm sharing too much and asking too much of the other person, especially if they are from the US, and then it comes across as being nosy. So it's hard, it's hard because I'm from India, and in India you want to know everything, like your family and, where were you born, blah, blah, blah. And then, it's really, because I think that's how we gauge the person, so it's more like a friendship maker. And then maybe here it's, it's a different strategy. So I think it's also your culture and where you come from is how you kind of, judge people and gauge them, or whether you take them at face value. So it's really interesting, this whole topic, something you don't think about. And thank you for shedding some light on it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, because I think we often take the word trust as for granted. So there's so much more. How does that trust actually come to be? And if we take it to a very personal level, how do I make it happen? What does it consist of for me? Then we can actually be better at everything and anything we do in all of our relationships, whether they are social or they are at work, because it all boils down to the one and only philosophy that I have, which is know yourself. And that's why we do this. Okay, there's some more here.
So we had a unique experience because I'm actually a friendship maker, which really starts with feelings, like how you really feel a conversation and the power of empathy in a conversation. And she's actually totem polar. So the question of trust, I trust everyone from the get-go. Right. Unless it goes otherwise. Yes. And I think that's my philosophy of scaling, entrepreneurship, scaling social entrepreneurship, and really a fundamental mantra of how can you ignite somebody's courage and really flex their potential. So.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
We were kind of on the same page around the dichotomy between personal life and work life, and friendship maker much more in a personal space, and totem polar much more in a work space. We also contextualize that within the idea of code switching and kind of a lot of the pressures that are put on you when you are in tech, in finance, in areas that are dominated by a certain type of behavior, culture, race, age, that really kind of often puts you in a situation where totem polar positions you to gain credibility with them, and that is kind of required before you could ever have any kind of true trust or friendship maker capability.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would just add that we also realize that throughout our careers we've made shifts, and now we're at a point where we can bring our authentic friendship maker selves into totem polar situations, but in a very confident way. And so that's the three of us are just excited to share that.
To build the cred to be able to do that and not have that negatively impact you, especially as women.
Right.
Beautiful.
Have to spread out.
Thanks. One of the things that we were talking about was actually how people working remotely can impact this, where there's an expectation of formal communication, and it's kind of by default more external, or I guess totem polar. And like I had an observation where apparently people who work remotely from me thought that I was very cold and very focused on work and serious all the time, when people who work with me in the office see me, I believe, in a much more warm light.
Wow.
So there are challenges there, just especially as technology has advanced, where we don't have people in front of each other all the time anymore, and that can make that really hard.
Thanks for sharing
to add on that?
No, I agree completely, since I also do the same. I work from home.
Yeah. Yeah, virtual trust. How do you build it? Yeah, could.
We work at the same company and both agreed that by default we are both friendship makers, but because we are in a remote company and so we don't actually see each other except a couple of times a year, we don't have the chance to really talk about stuff other than work most of the time, and so it tends to be a more external thing by default until you actually make those relationships. And so we sort of, we both kind of agreed that we just sort of assume trust for everyone in our company. So it might be more that the public stuff is more likely to create distrust than trust because we kind of just assume that. But yeah, when we have the opportunities, the friendship making definitely takes over.
It's interesting when you are working with a team, and when you start with the team, you need to name the trust issue right off the bat, because there are teams that do not assume trust, or there are teams who assume that there's no trust. That's what I was trying to say. Right off the beginning, or there are teams that are truster teams who start off right off the bat with the assumption that we all trust each other to be competent to do what we are here to do. And if you don't name that, you kind of like end up in trouble later on in the conversations if that's not out in the open. There was somebody here who wanted.
Hi, thanks. So I think I'm more of the reverse of the standard thing, and a friendship maker at work and a totem polar in my personal life. And as a straight white male, I'm wondering if that's just because I have the luxury of being able to be very vulnerable in a work environment, because nothing bad will happen to me if I'm too vulnerable in a work environment because of all the privilege that I have coming.
Good point. Great point. Thank you.
I was going to mention that trusting trust in you is a thing too. I don't trust friendship style trust in me unless I understand where it's coming from. I trust totem pole style trust because I know why that person trusts me.
Right.
So interesting.
Wow. That's great. That's great. Anybody else is burning to tell their story? Yeah, I think that all points to knowing yourself and who am I at any particular situation, and where does that come from? So where does my trusting come from? And if you can somehow name that, then you are already a better team leader, a better team member, because if you know yourself and you help other people to know who you are and how you operate, the better chances there are for you to work better together and collaborate. So this is what I have observed, that if you use a lot of friendship making model as your primary default, you can be interpreted as that it's a sexual come on mostly by male. If you have a conversation with a male person, it can also make especially women look weak and invisible in a work situation. And what I mean by that is that if you are a friendship maker at work, you are not taken seriously as a potential contributor to the work we have at hand. And that might not be what you are after. That might not be your goal. If it is your goal to be just not part of the team, then go for it. It's an invisible cloth. And then the fact that it can bring out the prince syndrome in guys. They see you as a broken vessel, and they immediately jump into helping to fix whatever is wrong with you. And that might not be the message you want to send either. So to be aware of the consequences of, and these hazardous consequences might be very helpful in a work situation. And then a totem poler. How do we then judge the totem poler? We might see them as coming off as arrogant because they're demanding these different parts to be in place before they trust you. They make other people feel judged. And that's not usually a place where trust lives when you're not on equal footing with each other. And the friendship maker especially feels uncomfortable because they don't know the authentic you. They feel that you only have this veneer of a relationship, and trust can be very fickle. So does this make sense? It kind of connects to what you were talking. And then there are many other ways, but these are the ones that I've observed over and over again happen in team situations and in relationships at work. So my question and sort of a suggestion for all of us is to, at all times, look at how this bias, this sort of an unconscious bias, might dig into my way of expecting trust. And how do I then judge other people be reliable and honest, truthful and competent and strong? So it has this can be your lens. And this hopefully can help you think about this as a potential bias in your own thinking. So as I've worked with a lot of leaders over the years, there are 3 competencies that I have found are crucial for any leader to really create as their skill sets. And trust is really crucial in all of them. So first of all, to self-reflect, which is to know yourself, like we've talked before. And the most important thing about that is to see my impact on the other. If I'm a totem poler, what is the impact on this other person if they're not a totem poler themselves? And then to always listen deeply. So what are the signs, what are the signals that I can then interpret from this person to be one or the other ways, or many other ways? But if you are a good listener, you also become a good mentor and a coach for others. And all of this boils to the fact that we expect our leaders to be great at influencing and inspiring everybody on the team, in the organization, to work collaboratively together to achieve great things. And number 3 is easy to accomplish when you have a good skill set and understanding of the number 1 and number 2. So as a conclusion, to answer the question of how do you grow trust, there's basically 3 or 4 things that I would like to leave with you. And the number 1 is understand your trust preference. It might not only be the lens of masculine, feminine, but that's what I wanted to bring to the conversation today. Also, do not assume that the other person has the same way as you do. And especially when you are in a leadership position, it's really easy to just sort of assume that everybody is the same way I am, and they're not most of the time. And the way to get there is to be curious. Somebody mentioned it, to be nosy. I think it's really more important than to be nosy is to be fascinated by other people. If you take nothing else out of this conversation here, but the mindset of approaching everybody in your sphere as they are fascinating and you want to understand them, you will be guaranteed a better leader. So be curious, stay fascinated by others, and then concentrate on working on your own trustworthiness, your own honesty, your own competence and reliability and so forth. So that's what we want to focus on. Is there anything else that you want to point to based on this conversation that's not up there now that we should remember? Anything to add to the list? Then we're good. Then my question to you is, what are you going to do about it? There are different ways you can develop your own understanding, deepening your own understanding of trust. And since I work in that area, I do trust assessments as part of the whole leadership competence area assessments. So I do this type of assessments where trust is one of the other 13 competence areas where we look at how teams perform if you are in that sort of a team leadership position yourself. So if you're interested in talking to me about how to assess your teams and your team's trust, measure the level of trust on your teams, we can talk about that. And I have that measurement for you. I also have, recommend you check out Unpacking Trust. It's a new online self-study that's available for you with this code, tech+inclusion. If you want to do some self-study into 10 different parts to trust and how you can then use these trust wheels in your work with your partners and review processes. It's really a fun process. You can also then at the end of this become a certified trust builder if you're really into building, becoming an expert in trust. So there we go. Thank you, everyone.